And welcome back. You are now listening to another episode of It's All About Evolving, and I'm your host, Kathy Howell. Joining us today is an author, speaker, an ordained minister, and the founder of Divine Purpose Community Service. Welcome, Selena.
Very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. We appreciate you for doing this. In this episode, we'll be talking about co-parenting during this pandemic. And this topic it hits close to home for me. I can totally relate. Before I jump into that topic, I want you to tell us more about you.
Okay, sure. Absolutely. So you hit on a few of the topics already. Just a bit about my background. I am an ordained minister of religion. So my faith is a very big and important part of the rest of the things that I do. It's the foundation of pretty much everything. It's the blueprint for what I stand on. And out of that has been birthed a lot of different ministries. But I like to focus more on doing my community work, which is where Divine Purpose Community Services came into effect in 2015 officially, where God really placed it on my heart to be a little bit more proactive in the community, because I find that there's a lot of different things that we have acted for with the churchgoers, but sometimes people who may not always be going to the church or what have you, there may not be enough events or things like that. So that's where Divine Purpose Community Services came from. And I noticed that I would interact with a lot of people who wanted to talk about relationships, parenting, even their faith, or just things that they were going through and they needed a listening ear. So I decided to create a platform that would allow me to host different workshops, seminars, and events for both the family unit and individuals, whether it would be men, women, and things like that. I'm also a mother of a beautiful young lady. She is going to be 19 next month. So she's now no longer a baby, but always my baby. And I also just recently published a book called Healing for My Soul, 30 Steps to Healing, which is an accomplishment I'm really happy about. And I also have a clothing line called Selena Spencer Clothing. And that was also birthed out of a lot of the speaking engagements and things like that I did. And some of the sayings are things that, for example, what I'm wearing today, I'm wearing a t-shirt that says Pray, Hustle, Grind, Worship. And that was actually from a talk that I did, and created a clothing line out of that as well. So even the clothing is kind of like a faith base. It's about faith, healing, and strength for the clothing line as well. So that's a little bit of a background about me.
That is so awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. I know with any gift you have, right? To unlock that gift, there is a story behind unlocking it. So
Yes.
Would you mind sharing your story of how you became an ordained minister, or how did you even get to that level, or how you know you were supposed to become a minister?
Right.
What's the story?
Yes. So the story is really long, so I'm going to kind of give you the Coles Notes version of it.
Yeah.
But to put it simply is that I was born and raised in church. My father is a Pentecostal pastor, minister. Started his own church back in the 70s. His story was one of those of immigrants who came to Canada to basically start over, not really planning on staying here, but just planning on getting a bit more income to go back home to his family, because my mother still was there with my 3 older sisters. So the plan for them was to make a bit of income, go back home and build their life in Jamaica. My dad but he was called by God to start a ministry here in Toronto. So in time, my mom came up with my siblings, and I'm the last child of 7. Back then, when you go to church 7 days a week. You're embedded in it all the time. So it was a seed that was deeply planted inside of me. And, there were times in my life where I didn't understand, a lot of what I was being taught. To me, it was just repetition. And I was like, kind of felt like I was tired of church, didn't want to keep going to these prayer meetings. So my father had a habit of every long weekend. That was when we had to have a long weekend prayer meeting. So I was like, man, when I get on my own, I'm gonna have nothing to do with this stuff. I'm gonna still love God. I'm not doing all of this craziness. And it wasn't until I got into my teenage years, and I struggled a lot between the age of, I want to say 15, 16, with a lot of challenges, feeling like I didn't have an outlet to talk to. But again, that seed was planted, so I knew I could always pray. So prayer became like a constant thing in my life where I would just kind of talk to God and try to ask God to, kind of like help me through any situation I was going through. There were a lot of family challenges that were taking place at that time in my life. And that was my go-to, to actually just kind of have a conversation with God. And as I got older, I was very naive because I was sheltered a lot. So I ended up having some experiences that I could have probably overcome if I was a little bit more street smart. I am now, but
Yeah.
back then, it then opened the door for me to experience a lot of things that I probably shouldn't have, especially not at that young age. And not only that I shouldn't have experienced it, I should have been, I didn't have the proper tools at the time. So I was going into the world basically with the mindset like everybody was like Jesus. So I was very giving, very open to like everything, everybody. I was, again, listening to scripture. I'm going to treat people the way that I want to be treated, but wasn't getting that in return. So that's how even healing for my soul got birthed, because I had to go through this healing process as well to get rid of all the hurt and things that I was dealing with for years and years of things that would happen. So I was still very active in the church, but, kind of not really following all the practices because, again, I felt like whatever. And at the age of, I want to say, I think it was like about 23 was where I was, I just had graduated university and came out, and I met my daughter's dad, and we ended up having my daughter. So that experience alone, being in the church, pregnant, and the pastor's daughter, was a whole nother experience. And back then in the church, if you are pregnant, you're not allowed, and at least in my father's church, you're not allowed to come to church. So then that was a huge struggle for me. And as a result of that is where a lot of my healing had to take place. So just being very prayerful, because I had that seed planted, speaking with the Holy Spirit each and every day kind of gave me the tools that I needed to go through this healing process that took quite a long time, especially because I loved church. I loved going and I couldn't go. It was really a challenge for me. But out of that, what God does is he tends to take you in a situation that the enemy meant for bad. We hear this all the time. He turns it into good. And that's exactly what he did in that whole situation. From the time I was pregnant with my daughter till even today, what God has done is anytime that I have a challenge, that whether I created it for myself or it came in my presence, I learned from it. So I would start meeting people, young ladies, like myself, who hadn't gone through what I went through yet. And they would just start pouring out to me what they were going through. And then I would be able to be like, oh, wait a minute, this is what you can do. Try this, say this. How do you feel here? And that's where Divine Purpose got birthed, because I was realizing, I'm like, oh, a lot of people want to know more about their purpose, and we all have a divine purpose and not everyone knows. So I was like, you know what? I got to do something with that. So that's how that kind of developed from there. And again, just a lot of it based on life experience. Has been a lot of highs and a lot of lows. And what I've been able to do is use those experiences to put them into platforms for the different events that I do. For example, I do an annual tea party called Ladies Hat and Tea. And that's a healing for my soul type of event. And recently I've birthed an online show called Mind, Body, and Soul. And that's where I want to take people to another level and understanding that it's not just about prayer. It's not just about eating right. It's not just about meditating, but holistically, God wants us to live a life that we are feeding all parts, because we're not all spirit yet. We still have things that we want to do to feed our mind, body, and soul. So that's kind of where that all came from. And like I said, being the last of 7, that there was a lot that I learned with regards to being like in relationships, because we have so many different types of relationships, whether it's parent to child, siblings, aunt to uncle, all those experiences. I was able to kind of bottle those all up. And I kind of ran away from ministry for a while in the sense of being ordained. But as I kind of got back into church after I had my daughter, I had a good mentorship, which was my father at the time. And he kept on pushing me. He kind of would be like, not in a forceful way, but he'd be like, you have a gifting, you have a calling, go up and exhort or go up and say something. And it was finally through just letting go. I have another talk that I do that says, pray, let go, now breathe. And it was really just the element of me saying, okay, God, what is it you call me to do? As much as I don't want to do it, what's your will for my life? And that's when I accepted the opportunity to become ordained. So I originally got ordained with my father's ministry back in 2012 officially, after I had started speaking in the church. And I had an experience in 2015 where I was blessed enough to go to California, Sacramento, California, and I joined with a ministry there and actually was ordained in 2000 and I believe it was 16 with that ministry as well as a minister. So that's a little bit of the short version of where all of this has come from and all of it's been birthed out of.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's a lovely, lovely story. And, I'm a believer that in everything that we're growing through, we're unlocking a gift.
Yes.
So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Now let's jump into the topic. Yes. Co-parenting.
Mm-hmm.
So co-parenting during this pandemic is a huge issue.
Mm-hmm.
How do you co-parent with an ex, who is we're supposed to be staying home?
Right. So it's a challenge co-parenting on its own already. Now you bring in this whole pandemic element to it. And it's like, oh, Lord Jesus, what do I do here now? So this might sound repetition might sound like, Lord, this girl keeps saying the same thing. I always start every situation, but especially challenging ones, with prayer. Because I think that if we could tap into that relationship that we're supposed to have with God first, mm-hmm. I'm telling you, it clears up so many things. Sometimes it's hard to hear the voice of God and know, okay, is this God telling me to do this or not? But as you build that relationship, you'll know. So even with co-parents, I had to do this with my daughter's dad too, because we didn't always get along the best from the beginning, especially when our relationship came to an end, right? So what I always tell people, number one, is pray about everything. You got to pray about whether or not you know within yourself, if it's a situation where, okay, God, I realize I might be overbearing in this situation. How do I deal with this person? Or God, this person is very difficult to deal with. How do I deal with this person? What are the words I should say? When are the moments when I should walk away? But once you do that, you kind of leave it in God's hand. You have to understand you're only human. So I would also take the pressure off. That's number two. Take the pressure off of yourself that you're going to get this whole co-parenting in the pandemic perfect, because it's kind of unique to everyone's situation, because everybody's going through something different. You might be in a household where both of you are essential workers, right? So now the dynamic is kind of changed. Does the child even stay with you? Do they stay with a family member? Do they go back and forth? So they only stay in one spot? And then it comes to an idea of age. So it really comes down to number three, is the communication between the two parents. Right. So it's putting aside any sort of differences and understanding that we're all in this together, as they've been saying, and we all have to figure out a way to kind of separate what has happened or what's going on in the past and start thinking about the child specifically. And I know it's hard to communicate sometimes with the other parent that, this is strictly for the child, because I know in my experience, sometimes it sounded like I was trying to be controlling, but I was really coming from a place of being a protective mother. And I know that I had moments especially when she was younger, that I was overprotective. So that comes down to the age of the child, right? My daughter is 18, she's going to be 19, but I'm still very active in making sure she has a relationship with her father. Because even as 18-year-olds, they get very busy, and then they, start doing life. And I'm always checking in, did you call your dad? So I always want to say to parents that they should try to have a conversation with the other person. If you have a good relationship, it should be pretty easy with the other parent, where you pick up the phone. Hey, what's your suggestion? Kind of find out what their thoughts are, so that you're not telling them what to do, right? Because nobody really wants to be told what to do, especially you're not in a relationship anymore. Right. So you as a mom, calling up dad and saying, or even vice versa, dad calling up mom and say, hey, here's what's going to happen. From now on, Samantha's going to come only once a month, when Samantha usually came every single weekend. We have to stop and say, okay, how can we make the visits work for both of us, and find out what that other parent's ideas are. Mm-hmm. Then share your ideas for how you think it should work. And then from that, say, okay, how can we come to a mutual understanding or agreement, right? So obviously there's typical things. I know one family that I know co-parents, the children actually come to still go to their parents' house, like
Right.
with the regular visits, but they also take extra precautions with cleanliness, right? So they actually have a conversation with the children and say, this is what's going on, so this is what you have to do when you get back to mom's house, XYZ. So you're laying out the specific rules, right? So it really comes down to not making the other person feel like you're controlling the situation, but trying to get into a sharing kind of conversation. And I tell people often too that communication is more about listening than speaking. And I think that that will help solve a lot of our issues if we stop for a while and think that, okay, even though she said this or he said this, what were they really saying? Where were they really coming from, right? Now, if you have a situation where you do have someone who's being very carefree about it, they have your child, they're letting a ton of people come over, you know, your child's younger, all these things they're being exposed to. At that time, I believe that a parent does have a right to kind of step in and say, hey, I understand this is your home, but again, I'm looking out for the best interest of our child. And if, you know, if you do have a need for these people to come over, maybe we need to look at things differently. Instead of every other week, maybe we need to do more video calls and interaction like that. Maybe we need to set some time apart during the day for the child. And then finally, I'm sure we can go into this more, but finally,
Mhm.
I think the key thing is speaking to the child. If you can do it as a trio or how many children are involved, like both parents there at the same time in the sense of a video call or, you know, the phone on a speaker, letting the child know you're in agreement so that they don't feel any of the stress, because we're all already feeling it. Even as
Right.
little people, they're feeling it too, right? So we want to kind of let them know, hey, mom and dad are in this together. We're all doing this together and we're a united front, you know, so that they kind of see and they kind of feel a little bit ease, because we have to remember it's really all about them. So those are the main things that I think that we can try to focus on. But like I said, everybody's scenario is different. And that's why I really urge parents to have that conversation, but making sure we're not just dictating this is how it's going to be.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. But my question is, what if you're dealing with someone who you're communicating, you have that communication, and you're trying everything in the book to even go to the process, as in getting a written agreement, and then they're not following through? What
Right.
would you suggest from there? I mean, there's so much you can do, as in you're communicating, you're listening to what the unsaid words, and
Mm-hmm.
it, how should I say, nothing is working on their end when the child is at their house. They're not
Mm-hmm.
following through, as in with the scheduling, or to say, okay, you know, you're supposed to wash your hands or use hand sanitizer, etc., etc. What would you do as a parent? And I
Yeah.
mean, they're not following through, they're not communicating, nothing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, and in those situations, like it's really out of your control. So you have to just make a decision at that point. You know, it's whether or not, okay, since now this person is not following what we agreed on, therefore, do I lessen the amount of interaction, because you can't cut it off completely, right? Or now when this child comes back to me, do I just have to double up on what I do on my end, right? Because even outside of a pandemic, I've been in similar situations where I've asked, okay, this is something that I'm trying to train my daughter to do, right? Or not do. I had to end up just making a decision that when my daughter came back to me, we had additional conversations. It's unfair. And I'm not saying that this is how it should be, because parents should try to accommodate each other, especially when you're looking out for the best interest of the child.
mhm.
But you have to just make a decision. I don't want anybody going against you know, any court order. Like say there's visitation that's set down already in stone by the court. You know, I don't want anyone getting in trouble, but if it's just already a verbal thing, I don't think anybody should really fully stop the child. But if you start feeling like your child's health is now in danger, you as a parent do have the right to make that known and saying, you know, until these changes are actually made, I'm really uncomfortable with letting him or her come to your home. And then just see what the response is to say, okay, can we come to an agreement? Do we need to do, like I said before, the video calls more to kind of help? Do we need to do that every single day, since you're not able to facilitate what I've been requesting at your home? Because again, like I said before, I'm repeating myself, we can't control what's happening over there, but we can
Right.
control how we're responding to it. So it would really just be a matter of just having that final conversation. It sounds like, from what you're saying, written agreements are being made. And even though you're doing it that legitimate, the person is still not accommodating. There's not much you can do in that situation, but control your own part. So it's either you're stepping up your game on your part, that when this child comes back to me, this is what it is. Or you can make a suggestion that maybe they don't go over as often, like I said, with the video calls, what have you, and see where it goes. It's a touchy situation because it sounds like if you're dealing with a parent that's not cooperating, especially during a time like this, they're not going to like that whole response back as the child can't come over as often. You know what I mean? They're probably going to have a resistance, and now you've created another issue. But as long as you know in your heart you're not doing it out of anger, for any other reason, because you hear stories, and both men and women do this. It's not a girl thing or a guy thing where, oh, okay, well, you're no longer with me, or this is the situation, so therefore I'm going to take it out on the kid. I'm not coming for them, or I'm going to take them from them. And it's not really about what's best for the child. So it's really just a situational type of thing where you have to stop, make sure you're not coming from a place of anger or hurt, but you're really looking at the best interest of the child. And I would suggest having one more conversation to say, hey, I'm extremely concerned. So it's either can you try?
It's like you said, it's very tricky, and I guess it's just something that we have to grow through. And
and it's unfortunate, right? Because it's a parent. It's not like it's one of your friends you could just cut off, right? Now, and I tell this to everybody, like sometimes we think that because it's blood, we got to keep it going. If the parent is being extremely toxic, that's a different thing, right? So, like for example, I've had people that I know that they will do video chats with the parent, the other parent, the child's doing a video chat with the other parent, and this is even before the pandemic, and they would hear them say something negative about the other parent to the child. Right. At that point, I believe as a parent, you might not do it in front of the child because, again, they're so sensitive and they feel everything. As much as we think we're hiding stuff from them, they're feeling it. Mm-hmm. I would definitely feel that parent has a right to be like, listen, we're going to have to cut these conversations if you're going to continue to tear me down in front of our child. We have to remember the child first, so it comes to a level of maturity. And that's why I say pray about everything, because we can't control other people. The only time is like a miracle can happen is if God steps in, and I've seen him do it. There's been times where I thought, like, I cannot communicate with this man. There were moments where, and I know I'm gonna talk the truth about me with my daughter. I was extremely protective of my daughter, right? So I think I shared this with you, where literally when she started going to her dad's house, she was about 2 years old, and that's without me. So we started off with this, she's just gonna go for the day thing, and I would cry like the whole time.
Yeah, I remember.
Right, until she came home, and I was like, Selena, you have issues. This is a problem, So I had to understand, okay, Selena, there's certain things that you can't control, because now you're in a situation where you're just parenting, you're doing the co-parenting. So what do you have control over, and what can you compromise on? Because you have two different individuals, and then this little person with a different personality too. So you got to be sensitive to what is going to bother them as well. Some kids don't care, they're in la la land. Other kids are very like, what's going on? So you have to take into all those dynamics, and then be wise. The person that you've had that child with, in most cases, you know them pretty well. You know their triggers that will get them upset, and you know their triggers that will get them happy. So I also suggest that you kind of play on the happy ones. Like, what do I need to say or do to kind of get this person to kind of be on my side? Now, I'm not saying lie. I'm not saying make promises of, because some people, they're letting go of, they don't want to let go of you or whatever it is, but it's the control thing sometimes. But play on what you need to play on sometimes to kind of get where you need to get. Again, right. I'm not encouraging lying. I'm not encouraging whatever. But for example, I know my daughter does better when she's fed. So if she's coming from school and she's tired and I want to have a conversation, you know what I do? I pick up a snack before I pick her up. That's what I was used to do when she was younger. Pick up a snack, make sure she's fed. Then I wait and I have a conversation because her energy level is up. Yeah. So let's say this person, that they're grumpier when they just finish work. That's not the time to have the conversation, right? let me wait till after he's done this, because I know his schedule and he's like this, or I know her schedule and she's like this. That's when I'm going to have the conversation, you know? It's kind of like, it's not really, I don't want to say your intuition, but just being wise about them. Like, go back to when you were together and you actually really like that person. If they're a difficult person, if you don't really fancy them much, but
Right.
stop and think, okay, what used to work? When was the good times? You know, try to go into that mode and be like, all right, so let me try to use certain words that are not gonna trigger aggression, but maybe will trigger a softer response. And again, not all of this is gonna always work.
Yeah.
But these are the tools that I know have worked. Like, I've done it with my daughter's dad, where I'm like, oh, you know what? Wow, you look so nice today. All of a sudden you see this big grin on his face, you know?
Yeah.
Because I know next week I'm gonna need you to pick her up. You know, I don't need to do all of that, you know what I mean?
Right.
But just because you're trying to just make your life a little bit easier. Yeah, so that's what I would say in that situation. But it's tough. That's where I get, again, prayer.
You know, I agree with you. Pray about it. Pray about it, and it will flow. I totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my other question before I let you go is that discipline, right? Say, for example, I'm going to use my son in just an example.
Sure.
He's talking to his dad, and he did something wrong, and I say, okay, no video games. He goes on, Dad, can I play my video games? Yes, you can. The phone conversation has ended. I go, why are you on the video game? Oh, my dad said I can play it. You know, and I'm like, no, you're here with me, no video games. And then mommy's the bad person. In that case, what to do? You know, so how do you navigate around that?
So children are manipulative. Okay. They're sweet little whatever, but they're little manipulators, right? So they know what they're doing. As young as he may be, I mean, they know exactly what they're doing. And he knew to ask dad, because dad's not there, and dad's gonna say yes. Like, even if dad knew, dad probably like, it's not my problem, yes. You know what I mean? Make mommy deal with it, right? So that really comes down to you and your child. I found that I've actually had to kind of go deeper with my daughter if she ever tried anything like that. So I would suggest that you actually have a conversation with your son, and it may, you know, start off very soft by basically telling him, when I tell you something, it stands here. Whether you're at your dad's house or what have you, you call your dad, you're not to do that. Then when it comes down to it, if it happens again, a punishment needs to be displayed on top of that. So now you were only supposed to go without video games for 1 day. Now it's 2 days. Because I specifically told you you're not allowed. You went behind my back and asked your dad. So instead of going back and say your dad doesn't live here, or, you know, whatever, because they will try to make you feel like, oh, now I'm the bad parent. Just X that out, because you're not. Because as much as they would be like, oh, whatever, because I know my daughter, and that's how it is. Usually the place where the child spends most of the time or lives with, you usually feel like you're the worst parent, but it's because you're doing the most, right? So when they go over to the other parent's house, sometimes it's not that they really want to spoil them, sometimes it is, but that parent does kind of look like the fun parent, because every time they go, every 2 weekends, they're gone to the movies. Like, my daughter went to like movies, Mexico, this, that, and all that kind of stuff, where I'm just home doing the laundry, making sure homework's done, whatever, and I'm thinking, whatever. But as she got older, it was like, no, mom, like, you're dope, you know what I mean? And, oh, I knew that when you were young. I was younger, but, you know, I'm not going to tell you that. So you're not the bad parent. We probably put that on ourselves. That's why I started off, if you remember, saying, take the pressure off yourself.
Right.
So you're not, they make you feel like you're probably the bad parent. They might even say it, you know, oh, dad's more fun, or you're not, whatever. Ignore it. It's not even true. You're still dope. You're still the most amazing parent, at being the main parent. You got more responsibility with this child. But I would say way more onto that child than the parent, because especially if you have a challenging parent that is like, oh, whatever, like, deal with it. You know, you might have some parent be like, okay, Sonny, didn't your mom tell you? So why did you ask me? You know, and in that case, that's good. Then it shows a united front, and they'll probably never do it again. But when you're dealing with a challenging parent that's like, whatever, you're going to have to talk to your child. And as, you know, for example, your son, I think you said your son is 7.
Yeah, he's 7.
So yeah, I'm sure he's wise and intelligent enough. He's playing video games, he'll get it. So it just simple. Oh, you don't want to listen to me? Guess what? Now you have another day of no video games. Mom, yep. Next time you'll know better. You know, so sometimes you have to just up the ante on the punishment and take the weight off yourself. I think sometimes as parents, especially single parents, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. I'll tell you an amazing thing that happened this morning. I just finished a move, right? And you know, again, we're dealing with a pandemic. There's so much going on, and got all our furniture in here. Woke up to a text from my daughter that said, "You have created such an amazing life for me, and I'm so grateful and thankful for it." And I was like,
"Oh my gosh!"
Because I'm still thinking I'm not doing enough.
Yes.
You know, and it was literally the Holy Spirit was like, "I told you, take the pressure off yourself." You know. To stop, realize that you're only human. We are not all spirit yet. So we can't be all up in there doing everything, you know, like, or even like our moms. Like I used to do that all the time. I got to cook like my mom, clean like my mom. My mom, till this day, my mom's 75. I don't know how she does it. Like she'll still stand. I'm like, don't you want to have a seat? No, you know, I don't like my kitchen dirty. I'm sorry. The sink's going to stay full right now. I'm tired. Right? I'm honest by myself. Like you had, you know, West Indian, I'm Jamaican background. You know, my parents had 7 of us, but we still sometimes, even though my mom was still doing a crazy amount, sometimes there was somebody that would come in, like people from the church come and help, you know, braid somebody's hair or come whatever. I didn't have that, even though it was just the one, but still I was like, Lord have mercy, I'm tired. So take that pressure off. We really do as mothers and fathers, especially single parents, to just stop and say, okay, you know what? Nah, you know, kids are gonna try to say, like I said, the little manipulators. They're cute little manipulators. They'll make you feel as though, oh my gosh, I'm not doing enough. And I'm not saying this to the bad parents, and you know who you are. I'm talking about us who are trying, you know, day by day to do what we're trying to do for our children. Just take that pressure off yourself. You're doing a great job. You know, it's really more in our head because we have this level of, I'm going to do better than what my mom did or my dad did, or I want them to have a better experience. And these children are
and they'll play on it, because I had my son play on it at one time. He said to me when I spoke to him about something, oh, you know what? I want to go live with my dad. I don't like you anymore. And he slammed the door. And honestly, that hurt me so much. And then I called my mom and was talking to her, and she goes like, he's playing you. He just has you on his little finger and wrapping you up like that.
Yeah, you gotta call him out on that, because my daughter did that to me at the age of 3.
Yeah.
Right? Something I said she couldn't do. And I'm just gonna go live with my dad. And I was like, let me tell you something. If you ever say that to me again, we're gonna have a problem. Right? And she got this look on her face. I was like I was like offended. I was like, after I carried you for 9 months, sick for the 9 months, you know, all this, I'm like,
you're gonna say that to me.
Yeah. And then my dad said it to me one day. He saw us interacting and he said to me, you know, one day she can grow up and decide that she's gonna go and live with her father. And I was like, oh no, absolutely not. And he goes, no, she will. So I need you to prepare you, because he could see how much I was just like connected to my daughter. So he was like, no, there's a strong possibility. I need you to know that that young lady, because my daughter's always been very independent since a child, like acted older than her age. He's like, that young lady at 15 can turn around and say, I want to go live with my dad, and there's nothing you can do about it. And because he kind of prepped me for that, even though I didn't like how that sounded, I had that in the back of my head, that Selena, you know what, it's not much you can do. It's, again, we can only control so much. We just have to accept situations as they come. But yeah, they're little manipulators. Like if you don't remember anything after this whole entire podcast, remember that they know what to play on, right? So they're really smart.
Yeah, and I'm so happy you mentioned that's the part where I believe it's hard for any parent, not only mom, but any parent, is when the child is older and they decide, okay, you know what, I want to go live with the other parent. And it's like, it hits home sometimes where it's like, okay, am I not good enough? And you tend to turn to yourself, what did I do wrong? But then really, you did nothing wrong. You're just here
Right.
to guide that child, and then that child has to make that decision. And it's just, you have to be at a place where you just let it go. It's so hard to let go. Like, I
So hard.
never understood when my mom would, do certain things. When and I was older, I was like, hey, I'm old now, like, why are you telling me to do this? But even though my
Right.
son is not that old, like, it's just to think of it, and imagine that, okay, that day will come one day, and you're just gonna have to accept it.
You will, because especially when you have a boy child,
Mm-hmm.
and some people may not agree with me on this one, but I think it's very important that both parents are involved, whether you're girl or boy. But there's certain things that a woman cannot teach a male child, that only a male can, because we're coming from a viewpoint of just male experiences from the outside. But they function differently as men, just like even with women. Like, there's certain things that a man can't teach his female daughter, right? He
Right.
can tell her and give her an idea of what, we can still raise amazing young men. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that we can't by ourselves, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes that male influence is what can really benefit a child, especially if it's a positive male influence, right? I'm not talking about any male influence, but a positive male influence can start giving them an idea of manhood, especially when they start coming into things about their body that they might be uncomfortable talking to their mom about, right?
Right.
Can you tell them anything? I'm being very blunt. Can you tell them anything about their sexual desires? Like, you can't. You can only tell them from an outward in. Okay, well, I know this is happening to you at this age, possibly. They're like, Mom, I can't talk to you about
But
that.
this, right.
Right. So, it might change. He may turn around and be like, deuces, I'm going to my dad. And you're probably going to cry and you're probably going to feel hurt about it. But you have to breathe and realize you've done well.
Right.
You're okay. And sometimes they'll come back to you too, right? So there's so many stages in this parenting world with your child because there's a mixture of what they're dealing with, especially on their own as they get into teenage years. Parenting looks so much different. Like, people think once your child gets to a teenage years, oh, okay, it's freedom. You can run up and down, do whatever you want. But depending on your parenting styles, it just looks different. Because right now with my daughter, 18 going on 19, now I'm transitioning her into adulthood, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we were in the States, I found that a lot of people that we knew, once their child was 18, that was it, hands off, they're on their own. I parent differently with my daughter, where I'm like, okay, hands off slowly. And I start making her responsible for things slowly, so that she is not just thrown into the world without these life skills that she may need, like especially with finances and things like that, or relationships, right? So, and I'm not saying that it's bad that everybody just jumps out, and kind of not everybody, but it seemed like a lot of them over there were just like, you're 18, you're on your own, you're going to college, that's it, pay for everything yourself. I want my daughter to be set up a little bit differently than how I was, so that her struggle is not my struggle. She has a different kind of story. So it just changes. It's a little different. And again, per child, you may have more than one child, right? So what you did for Rebecca at 19 is not going to be the same for Samantha at 19. So then you have to start really just narrow it around your child's personality and figure out, okay, what works best for them. But again, you could do all that and you can work it, and that child still turn around and be like, deuces. Like you said before, I'm out. It's been great. I'm going to go stay with mom, or I'm going to go stay with dad. And again, it just comes back down to taking the pressure off. There's not much we can do about it. It is what it is. Because even if you were with his father, he could still at 18 be like, I'm done. I'm out.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? The law you can't go from missing persons and call because they're 18. They're gone. Right? And then you'll question yourself and you're thinking, what did I do wrong? Nothing. Probably most likely nothing. But they're their own person. They're individual people going through their individual thing. Comes back down to, you just pray and cover them and pray that they're okay, that you've planted the right seed and they'll be all right.
Yeah, that is so true. And I believe that sometimes the expectation as a mom or I would say parent, is so high that you don't realize that and take the time out to actually learn the personality of that child. And okay, you expect them to go to college when really they don't want to go to college. You just want to say build something and that's just what they want to do. But because we expect so much of them, we tend to add the pressure, and then there's a whole chain reaction there.
So I'm glad you said that. So we have so many unrealistic expectations in life, period, right? And especially when it comes to parent to child relationships, again, and it doesn't come from a bad place all the time, because we usually want our children, as good parents, you usually want your children to do better than you did. You want them to have more experiences than you did. But then, like you said, if a child's experience, you know, they want to be a hairstylist, why do they need to go to university for that? They
Right.
really don't, because, and then you see the skill. It's different if you notice that they don't have the skill. But if they did cosmetology in high school, now they just need a professional training. There's nothing wrong with them going to professional training, because hairstylists, if you're a good one, you're making a lot of money. You're now an entrepreneur. You're owning businesses. It branches out into so many different things. You could now be selling hair products, make your own products. Like, there's so many different levels to it. But we have in our society this expectation that, oh, you know, what are other people going to say? You know, we're worried about the opinions of our family. Too bad. I remember when I got divorced, and this is another part of my story, that's why I couldn't even add it. That was an experience in itself. But I got divorced, and my mom, you know, and she came from a very loving place. My mom's an amazing mom, but she had that mentality of what are people going to say? So she's like, oh, you know, somebody asked me, and I was like, Mom, I don't feel any shame about it. I'm divorced. It didn't work out. Because at the end of the day, a lot of these people are living with people that they should have divorced, but they're sitting in it because they are afraid of what somebody's going to say.
Yeah.
You know, or you're making up stories. Oh, my child is actually going to do his master's when little Johnny is working at McDonald's. Like, and that's nothing wrong with that. You know, if that's where your child is at, it's different if you have a lazy child.
Yeah.
Somebody that has no ambition, doesn't want to do nothing. You got to do something, right? But if you find that your trade, you know, it's more of a trade and it only requires college, then you do that. You know, so it's really that unrealistic expectation that we place on ourselves, and then we worry about so much of what other people say, that we end up going into putting our children into programs. Sometimes, like, I have this one friend who shall remain nameless, but has her children in so many different programs, and she's dying. Like, she is physically drained, she is emotionally drained. And I'm like, okay, well, you know, and they're younger, and I was like, maybe we should need to balance this out, because I had to do it with my daughter. My daughter did professional dancing, competitive dance,
Right.
for a while, but then it became a point where it became a bit of a challenge for me, and I had to pull her out. And it was sad for me. She cried. But I had to make a decision for our family. What was best? Is it going to be okay for mommy now to be in debt and then not have a good situation and also be physically ill, because it was also a physical challenge situation as well? Or is this something, because I asked her, I said, is this something that you want to do as a profession? And it wasn't. So I'm like, okay, so then we got to rethink this and see if we can supplement this with something else. And we did. We supplemented it with competitive cheerleading, because it was a little less burdensome for us financially and in other areas, right? So it really comes down to that. We just really have to stop and say, okay, what are we really doing because we're doing this for the child, or are we really living through the child? And this is not even what your child wants to do, and making sure that we're being more aware of your individual. You talked about that before. We talked about it. Learn the individual personality of your child.
Right.
Each one of them, not your children as a whole, but each child. And that's where you can kind of, as a parent, kind of navigate the discipline, navigate the extracurricular activities, and everything else kind of comes from that. And it's a bit of work in progress, and they change over time too. So it's like they were like this, you know, between 5 to 8, and now they're a different person, you know, between now 9 to 12. But it's just part of what we signed up for.
Yeah,
you know?
that is so true. And I can relate to the activities, because at one point my son, he loved karate, and then he was like, I don't want to do karate anymore. I don't like karate. And then now it's soccer. So then I'm like, okay, maybe he's going to change from that. So it's just something that you have to accept, that they're growing too, and they will change too.
Yeah. Because my daughter was like that too. It took me a couple of years to find her thing. So we did soccer. She doesn't like to run, so it was like, scrap that. We did a whole bunch of different things, until from gymnastics is what took us to the dancing, because she didn't like gymnastics either. So then it was like an elevation, and it wasn't until about 12 that we kind of found her thing. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's all about evolving, right?
It is, exactly. It's all about evolving, and they're little people evolving themselves, right? Trying to figure it out. And the only thing I always make my daughter do is finish. So if her program is from January to June and she asked for it, you're gonna finish. You don't have to sign back up unless there's a physical reason why you can't do it. But when you make a commitment, and that's the thing I was trying to teach her, was about the lesson of commitment. When you make a commitment, especially when it's a team effort, it's different when you're in an individual sport or what have you. You can't let your team down. So there's nothing wrong with you and you just don't like it anymore. We're just gonna finish, and then next year we won't sign back up. So that was the one thing that I was kind of stern on, because I wanted her to remember that you try your very best to be a team player and stay committed when you say you're gonna be committed to something. And then it's all right to be like, okay, well, now I'm gonna change my mind and do something else. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy you mentioned that. That is so important, because then if you don't enforce that, or say implement that, then the child will grow up thinking like, okay, it's okay to start something and just pull out. I don't care who is around me. I don't care who's on the team. I'm fine. I can just pull out, whatever kind of a thing. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and it's the same thing even with my daughter when we used to play games. So she didn't like to lose, and when they're younger, you kind of let them win. Right? So it's like, you let them win. But she was like 6. And I was like, okay, I'm going to start breaking her out of this little, you're going to win everything. But I knew it was one of those games, a game Trouble. And Trouble is one of those things, you just never know who's going to win. It's just a luck of the game. It's not skills. It's nothing. It's just luck. And the game looked like she was about to lose. And typically, if she was like, I don't want to play anymore, I'd be like, okay, we don't have to play. It's fine. So I realized now she kept doing it, where every time she thought she was going to lose, she's done. Right? So this particular day, I was like, no, you're going to play. And tears started to fall. And she's like, I don't want to play. I said, no, we're going to finish. And we went through, and she ended up winning the game. And it was like the best lesson ever. I was thankful she won. I was like, oh, Lord, this might go the opposite way. But she did win the game, So that was another, and then I took that as a teaching moment, because not every time you want to make it a teaching moment, you want them to have fun. But this particular day had to be a teaching moment, where I was like, you know what? No, this is to teach you that you don't give up so easily. Just because things get tough and it looks like it's not going to go your way, you got to push through. And that's why it's good. Now she beats me in everything. Like, it's literally horrible, but now she won't. She's trying to, win everything. But
yeah,
good thing.
Yeah, that is so true. I experienced that with my son too. He will literally cry, "You're so mean.
Yes.
You're cheating. I don't want to play anymore."
That's okay. You'll be fine.
Yeah, but really, we're building them, because in the real world, people are not gonna baby you. You're gonna have to go for what you want, despite whatever comes at you. So that's the process right now we're working through with him.
Yes. Yeah. And they'll get it, because it is a life skill. It's like, hey man, I'm doing it to you in the house, but it's gonna be worse out there. So you'll thank me later.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing everything with us, Selena. I really enjoyed it. Any final thoughts?
You're welcome, and thank you so much. Again, I just want to reiterate, taking the pressure off yourself as a parent, especially during these trying times, doing your very best to just really pray and trust God that He's covering you and your children, and even the other parent that you're co-parenting with. And just coming back to realizing that you are only human. You're not all spirit yet, so we don't have everything figured out. There are lots of books on parenting and how to be a good parent, but nobody has your particular child. All of us are uniquely made, and like you said, we are evolving. So we just have to continue to build our mind, body, and soul and live the best life possible. So I thank you again for having me today.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. And you would mind sharing your handles, or?
Sure. So do follow on Instagram. It's at Selena Spencer. My clothing line is also on Instagram at Selena Spencer Clothing. On Facebook, it's again my name, Selena Spencer. I also have a website, which is selenaspencer.com. I'm also on LinkedIn and Twitter and Pinterest, all of them Selena Spencer. So you can find me anywhere, and also on YouTube as well.
And I'll also leave her information in the show notes. I appreciate you guys so much for listening, and God bless you.
God bless. Thank you.